How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another video. Welcome to our brand new series called How Does It Work? In today's episode, we're going to be looking at how the CPU works. Now, first of all, what is a CPU? A CPU is basically the central processing unit, hence the name CPU. It's at the heart of your computer or any electronics and is one of the most important parts. To understand how a CPU works, we must first know the parts of a CPU. The parts are as follows. We have the IHS or Integrated Heat Spreader, which is the lid of any CPU. Please note a CPU can still function without an IHS. Then there's the PCB, which has space for the die and pins or contact points at the bottom. And then the last part is the CPU die, which is where all the magic happens. So basically the CPU die is made up of silicon and is about the same size of your fingernail. Inside the die we have many tiny copper wires called transistors. They are measured in nanometers. Now just to put 1 nanometer in perspective, a single strand of hair is about 80 to 100,000 nanometers in thickness. The smallest transistors are 7 nanometers in thickness. Transistor counts may vary from 100,000 to 200 billion transistors to one CPU die, which is again the size of a fingernail. Crazy, right? Alright, enough talking about transistors, let's move on to how a CPU actually works. So in a typical PC, we have the motherboard, which has the CPU, RAM, GPU, and sometimes our storage, meaning M.2 drives. Other than that, we have a power supply case and a hard drive or SSD. So basically our RAM chips or random access memory has tons of instructions for our CPU. So the data goes from our RAM to the CPU, which decodes and executes or processes the data and sends it back to the RAM where it is kept until needed. When needed, it will be sent to an output device like a monitor. Now modern day CPUs do this thing called batch processing, whereby the CPU processes batches of information at a time, which is more effective and faster to process. Meaning instead of processing one instruction at a time, it processes groups of instructions called batches. Now let's talk about cores and threads. When CPUs were first manufactured, they had one core, which meant they would process one instruction at a time. Over the years we have developed CPUs and now they have more cores. Some CPUs have 2 cores, some have 4, some have 8, 16, 32, or even 64 cores. Threads are really simple to understand. While cores are physical devices that handle the processing of data, threads are virtual devices that manages the tasks given to the different cores, meaning which tasks go to which cores and which cores basically stays unused. Clock speed. Now you guys have probably heard about this before. Clock speeds are measured in gigahertz and megahertz. Note 1000 megahertz equals 1 gigahertz. The clock speed measures the number of cycles your CPU executes per second. Cycles is technically a pulse synchronized by an internal oscillator. So clock speed is basically the amount of data a CPU can process in a given amount of time depending on your clock speed. Cache. This word might sound a little bit strange, but what is cache? Cache is used by the CPU to reduce the average time it takes to access data from the main memory. All in all, cache is smaller, faster, and closer to the CPU's cores and hold the most frequently used data from the main memory. Now it's time for the last thing, and that is your CPU's architecture. So as we mentioned earlier, the CPU has billions and billions of transistors all in a very tiny space. How do they not collide with each other? This is where the CPU architecture comes in. The CPU architecture is basically the layout of transistors in a CPU die, which is very complex because it is such a small place with so many transistors. Different CPUs from different companies have different transistor layouts. For example, Intel currently has the Intel Coffee Lake microarchitecture, and AMD has their Zen 2 and Zen 3 microarchitecture. So all in all, that is how a CPU basically works, and CPUs will continue to be at the heart of all electronics for many more years to come. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope you guys learned something and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Also, I'm offering services on Fiverr. I'm editing videos, making custom logos and banners and channel arts, and I am also making custom intros and recommending PC parts, drones, phones, laptop, etc. to people all on Fiverr. I will have a link in the description. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram at Syndrome Tech YouTube and on Twitter at Syndrome Tech 1. And if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on post notifications for more awesome content like this. And be sure to follow up on my new series, How Things Work, for more videos on the way stuff works. Until next time, goodbye.